Like most people at this time of the year, you've got it, and if you have a garden, you've got an abundance of squash. Or maybe somebody's gave you plenty of squash and you have a lot of them. Well, I've washed this squash right here. And I'm cutting off the blossom end and the stem end of each one, and I'm going to shred these squash, and we're going to make squash relish. Squash relish is a recipe a friend of mine gave me. She's in her 80s now. I'm thinking around 84 probably, and she gave this to me many years ago, and I have really enjoyed this recipe, me and my family. And we're going to make and can this squash relish recipe today. It's just a matter of taking the squash that we have. I have some cucumbers in here too, but I'm not going to use those right now. I'm just going to focus on the squash. This is a good way to use up your squash. Preserve it. It's so good. We enjoy it alongside of beans and on hot dogs and different things. Now I will be using my food processor for this next step with a shredding blade, and the reason I do that is because I've usually got so much that this is the quickest way that I can get it done, that I can get it shredded up. I don't have a lot today, just enough to make a small batch, but sometimes I have a lot of squash to process, and I like to use the food processor because it makes things go quicker and it shreds it in the right size that I need. Now, it doesn't matter what kind of squash you have. You can see I've got some zucchini and I've got some yellow squash. And I make it a lot with just the yellow squash, but I usually just use what I have and use it up. It's a good way to do that. You want your squash shredded like this. Just go ahead and get all your squash shredded up. And then we'll move to the next step. Now I've got my really big pot right here. This is my canning pot. I've got my 4 quarts of squash shredded up right here, and I'm going to add that to the pot. Now that we've got our squash in the pot, we're going to proceed and add our next ingredients. So it says 2 large green bell peppers chopped. Well, my peppers are going to be out of the freezer, and they're not all green. I'm using my bell peppers, and I think there's a pimento or 2 here, and they're out of the freezer, so I'm just going to add those. So you can really add whatever pepper that you'd like to add. It can even be a little spicy if you'd like it spicy. Your peppers don't have to be green. They can be red or whatever color you have, yellow. The recipe calls for green, but I've always just used whatever peppers that I had. And this calls for 6 medium onions chopped. So I have my onions right here. They're also frozen. So I'm going to use my onions out of the freezer. They're not as finely chopped as the recipe calls, but that's okay. Now it calls for 4 cups of sugar. So we're going to add that. That seems like a lot, but that's a lot of relish we have in that pot. And then it calls for 4 cups of apple cider vinegar. You can use whatever vinegar you have. I sometimes mix apple cider vinegar and the white vinegar, the clear vinegar. Now at this point, I go ahead and start cutting this on about 6. So I can bring this to a boil. You can stir your ingredients around. It calls for 1/2 cup of salt. I use the canning and pickling salt. That seems like a lot of salt, but you have to remember you've got a lot of vegetables in here. 4 quarts of squash, 2 large peppers, 6 medium onions. So it's a lot of vegetables in this pot. Now you can add your spices. It's 2 teaspoons of mustard seed. I love mustard seed. It's one of my favorite spices. It only calls for 1/2 teaspoon of turmeric, but I love turmeric, so I usually add 2 teaspoons. It adds a beautiful color and it's really good for you. And then it calls for 2 teaspoons of pickling spices. Now we'll just stir that in. We're going to bring this to a boil. And then we're going to cut it down to a simmer and simmer it for 10 minutes. It's taking mine just a little bit longer to come to a boil because I used a lot of those frozen ingredients. Okay, our squash relish, we brought it to a boil and let it boil for 10 minutes. And then we simmered it for 10 minutes. So here's our squash relish, and it's ready to be put up in its jars. Well, I have my jars here in my oven because you know I put them in the oven because I don't have a lot of room to put big pots of boiling water. This is what I put my camera on. This is what I use to hold my little tripod. This block, you probably see that in my videos a lot. It's my little, I put my tripod on that. Well, we've got our squash relish. It's boiling, and I have a Fresh Tech right here. This is a great thing for me. I'm not sponsored by Fresh Tech today. I'm just sharing with you something that I use when I can. You don't have to have this, but it is it'll save you a lot in the kitchen. This is put out by Ball, and it's a big pot with a rack in the bottom of it there. It's got the dial there on the front, and it's for canning. You can use it for other things, but I use mine for canning most of the time. I have used it a few times when I've had a crowd over to cook some chili or stew or something, but in general I use this pot when I can because I'm so limited on space over here. You see how big this big pot is that has the squash relish in it? It comes over here. And if I had several pots sitting over here, and this is a very small element. So I just love this Fresh Tech canner, and I'm thinking about getting another Fresh Tech canner so that I can do more in a smaller amount of time. But you might hear this thing as it's heating up. I'm going to go ahead and turn it on canning. My squash relish is ready to jar up. I'm going to go ahead and get my jar. My jar's out of the oven, and I'm going to go ahead and fill those up. Of course, these stove units have not been turned on, but I put a towel here when I bring out the pan that I have my jars on to keep this from slipping around. I'll need 2 hands to get my jars out, so I don't know if I can hold the camera and get the jars out with one hand. We'll try it. No, I'm going to have 2 hands. I keep my jars in the oven on 250 degrees. 250 degrees Fahrenheit. You can see there. And that keeps my jars, after I've washed them and cleaned them really good, I put them in this pan and I put them in the oven and I hold them on 250 degrees Fahrenheit while my squash relish is processing, while it's simmering. I've got my Fresh Tech canner over here going. It has its own heating element here, so it's independent of my stove, and I can really move that anywhere I need it. If I find my space is really tight right over here, I can move that Fresh Tech canner, water bath canner. It's not a pressure canner, it's just for water bath canning. And I can use that, I can move it wherever I need it, and I really like that. It also has a spout for drainage right here. So you don't have to pick this big thing up. This pot comes up off of this burner. This is the burner unit down here, and it sits on it, and you plug it in. And then when you're ready to drain it, you can drain it with that spout. That is a very, very useful I want to put you here where you can see me fill these jars up. Now you can use a funning funnel if you want to, a cannon funnel, sorry. I get a lot of questions on the jars and the cans that I use. Now my jars I've had for many years. I rarely buy new jars, but when I do, they're either mason or ball. And these are the same lids and rings that I use. I buy the Golden Harvest sometimes because they're cost effective. I prefer the ball cannon lids, and that's what I use. But today I'm using the jars that my friend gave me. I've washed these and had them in the oven, and I've got the lids that go with these, and that's what I'll be putting my squash relish in, since we're water bathing those and they have plenty of acid in them. Like I was saying, you can use a funnel if you want to, if you prefer to use a funnel. I've just been filling these up so long, it's okay if I splash out a little bit. I love the pretty yellow color of this squash relish. I kind of stir this as I go along. I'm going to change tools here and get this smaller dipper. Now I'm going to go ahead and fill up the rest of these jars, and I'll be back with you when they're done. I have my 6 grandchildren with me here today. They had to all come in and get a popsicle, so I had to take a minute and help them do that. They're my blessings. We're trying to enjoy summer while we have it. It goes by so fast. They'll be in school before we know it. All right, we got all of our jars filled up, and we got the canner over here boiling. So I'm going to wipe down these rims of these jars that are full. I'm going to put the lids on, and we're going to fill up our canner. We have to wipe the jar rims off because you see when you fill them up, you get some stuff that's on the side here. And you want to be sure that your jar has a good seal. And this is a step that you absolutely cannot skip. Because if you do, then all that food that's on the rim of your jar will prevent your jar seal and your glass of your jar from having good contact. And it'll prevent it from sealing like it properly, like it should. So you want to be sure and wipe these rims. And I just use a soap, a cloth that's dipped in soapy water. It doesn't leave a soapy film. I use the same dishwater here. And make sure it's a clean cloth and clean dishwater. And just wipe your rims. That's all you need. You just need a little clean water and clean cloth to wipe down your rims. I've been canning a long time. There's a lot of books on canning. A lot of books on canning. Here's a Ball Complete Book of Home Preserving, Complete Canning Guide from Better Homes and Gardens, the Complete Book of Home Canning from the Department of Agriculture, the Complete Guide of Pressure Canning, Amish Canning and Preserving, the Blue Book, all different versions of this, all different types of these Ball Blue Books that are good guides. So do your own research and can the way that you think is best for you and your family. This is what I've been doing for years. I've kept my jar lids hot in the oven with my jars after I've cleaned them really well. Now I'm just going to finger tighten all of these. And I'm going to find the matching lids. It might take a few minutes. And I'll get the lids on these, and I'll get these jars in this Ball Fresh Tech canner.
Hey, did you have a good day? So cute.
Now, as far as timing these, I go by the biggest jar. If it's a quart or more, I'll process this for 15 minutes. And so that's what I'm going to do this time. I'm going to go ahead and process these for 15 minutes. And I set a timer because it helps me keep up with the time. We'll put the lid back on this. We'll let this come to a boil. And then I'll start the timer when that comes to a boil. I'm in the process of having to heat up lunch for the kids. One wants spaghetti and one wants pancakes. Processing time is up for these. And that's what the squash relish looks like. It's really good. We love it. It's a family favorite. Thank you for joining me today. And like always, until next time.